Hey everybody, it's about a quarter to one on Tuesday, October 14th. Earlier today, independent journalist Ken Klippenstein put out an article on his website. You can find it at kenklippenstein.com. He was leaked a joint intelligence bulletin, and he wrote an article about that. It's a bulletin from DHS, Department of Homeland Security, to local police departments all across the nation, saying that the feds believe that the upcoming No Kings protests this coming Saturday, October 18th, are a cover for terrorism. They're flat out designating all of us as terrorists, domestic violence terrorists, domestic violence extremists. The No Kings protests nationwide are being eyed by the Trump administration amid the National Security Presidential Memo number 7, domestic terror panic. He's previously designated Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization, and he's put out several presidential memos like NSPM 7, which I'm going to do a separate video about later today, essentially designating all of us who are going to participate in these protests on Saturday and everybody who voted for Kamala Harris in the 2024 election as terrorists. Does he want to ship 75 million people to Guantanamo Bay without charge and just hold us all indefinitely and waterboard us and torture us? I think Stephen Miller wants to do that. Reading from his article, the FBI and Department of Homeland Security are warning police departments across the country that protests against ICE or the Trump administration policies are cover for terrorism to occur, according to the restricted circulation intelligence bulletin that he references in this article. The bulletin is the latest sign that Trump's National Security Presidential Memo number 7, National Security Directive ordering federal agencies to root out domestic terrorism, will ramp up surveillance and monitoring of protests and free speech. There's the beginning, the intro of this joint intelligence bulletin. It refers to people as domestic violence extremists, DVEs, and they cite as justification for this 2 attacks at ICE facilities in Texas, one in July, one in September, which resulted in 4 casualties, which were not connected to any No Kings protests. The first No Kings protests took place in June of this year. But these attacks at ICE facilities underscore the elevated threat environment for ICE operations in the United States, and it encourages all law enforcement partners to remain vigilant to detect, prevent, or respond to domestic violence extremist incidents targeting ICE personnel or facilities in the United States. Back to the article. Republican leaders are joining the panic over so-called domestic terrorism, with 2 top officials this week likening the upcoming No Kings anti-Trump protests to terrorism. Speaker Mike Johnson said last Friday, they have a Hate America rally that's scheduled for October 18th on the National Mall. It's the pro-Hamas wing and Antifa people. Majority House Whip Republican Tom Emmer, the 3rd highest ranking member in the House, also called the upcoming No Kings protest a Hate America rally, attributing it to the terrorist wing of the Democratic Party. They are straight up calling us domestic terrorists. If you disagree with Trump, you are a terrorist. And this government is going to treat you like that. I'm gravely concerned about Saturday's protest marches nationwide. These comments appear to be the first where congressional leaders have adopted the Trump administration's framing of protesters as being linked to terrorists and terrorism. DHS Secretary Gnome recently said that Antifa which has been designated a domestic terrorist organization, is just as dangerous as ISIS. House Majority Leader Steve Scalise echoed his colleagues' rhetoric, deeming the upcoming No Kings event a hate America rally. It's a protest against kings, monarchs, and dictators. It's anti-fascism. They say that protesting against having a king, a monarch, or a dictator in the United States means that you hate America. Just weeks ago, this kind of talk was largely confined to more flamboyant administration figures like White House Senior Director for Counterterrorism Seb Gorka, who said back in June that the first round of No Kings protests appeared to be providing material support for terrorism. This leaked intelligence bulletin is dated October 1st. It is titled, "Domestic Violent Extremists Pose Increased Threat of Violence to ICE Facilities and Personnel." It is intended for consumption by law enforcement across the country. Employing the FBI's euphemism for domestic terrorists, DVEs, domestic violence extremists, the bulletin suggests that those who are or might attack ICE and other federal facilities are lurking behind the No Kings demonstrations. Here's the rest of page 1 for that bulletin. Again, you can find this at kenklippenstein.com. It's the first main article on his page. Again, it's like they use these two attacks on ICE facilities from July and September and link them to the No Kings protests. There is no link between those two. There's none. And they kind of give up the ghost a little bit at the bottom in a footnote on page 1. The FBI and DHS define a domestic violence extremist as an individual based and operating primarily from within the United States or its known territories, without direction or inspiration from a foreign terrorist group or other foreign powers, Here we go. The mere advocacy of political or social positions, political activism, use of strong rhetoric, or generalized philosophic embrace of violent tactics does not constitute extremism and may be constitutionally protected. Speech, free speech, First Amendment, protests, protesting against the government, constitutionally protected speech. Attacks in the past, the bulletin says, quote, took advantage of First Amendment protected activity, quote, conveying the narrative that the protests themselves demand monitoring by law enforcement and are part of some extremist conspiracy. There's no evidence of that. Saturday's protests are just going to be regular citizens and civilians taken to the streets to say that Donald Trump sucks. Quote, well, I'm going to skip that paragraph. There were 4 casualties at these 2 attacks. No single ICE agent has been killed. The alleged Dallas ICE shooter, Joshua John, J-A-H-N, 29-year-old, opened fire on an ICE facility, killing 2 immigrant detainees and wounding a 3rd before taking his own life. He did not shoot any ICE agents. The bulletin says, FBI investigation into the suspected shooter revealed that he expressed anti-ICE sentiments. The author of this article, Ken Klippenstein, spoke with several of the shooter's friends who said he was a largely apolitical troll who they thought just wanted to spring chaos. His brother also said the shooter had not had any strong feelings about ICE or politics in general, and that he thought the shooting was carried out indiscriminately. The bulletin's second example describes a July attack on the ICE Prairieland Detention Center in Alvarado, Texas. The Justice Department says that a group of assailants dressed in black tactical clothing used fireworks and graffiti to lure ICE and law enforcement personnel out before opening fire. And horrifically, they shot one ICE officer in the neck. That officer is recovering and was not killed. The bulletin closes with a vague reference to domestic violence extremists having, quote, leveraged large lawful protests in multiple cities in California and Oregon since June, implying some relation between the demonstrations and domestic terrorism. Again, there is no evidence of that. Since page 2 of the bulletin, since at least June 2025, small groups of threat actors, some of whom are domestic violence extremists, have leveraged large lawful protests in LA, California, multiple cities in Oregon to engage in violent activity targeting ICE property. These individuals have caused damage to ICE facilities, property damage in Portland and Eugene, Oregon, and have engaged in violent confrontations with law enforcement. They don't report any injuries. Domestic violence extremists, here we go, planning an attack on ICE personnel, facilities, or operations or other law enforcement officials may conduct surveillance, online research regarding when ICE personnel may be arriving or departing a facility or operation, firearms practice. So if you go to a gun range, if you're on the left and you own a firearm and you go to the gun range, you're now a terrorist. Or discussions about their operational plans with other like-minded domestic violence extremists via encrypted communication applications. Due to the highly personal nature of radicalization and mobilization to violence, it can be challenging to identify specific indicators of U.S. violent extremists' intent to commit violence. While not all encompassing observable indicators of mobilization to violence can be found, yeah. And then again, in a footnote, the activities may include constitutionally protected activity and should not be reported or acted upon absent articulable facts and circumstances that support the source agency's suspicion that the observed behavior is reasonably indicative of pre-operational planning associated with violence. Back to the article. There have no doubt been violent confrontation and instances of vandalism, but terrorism? There hasn't been a single ICE employee killed this year, and the officer shot in the neck seems to be the only major injury resulting from political opposition to ICE. ICE has killed several people at this point, but, what are you going to do about that? Shit happens, I guess. The lack of evidence linking these actual attacks to the No Kings protests or their organizers doesn't seem to matter, with the moral panic over domestic terrorism in full swing following Charlie Kirk's assassination, a 9/11 type event for this administration. In late September, Attorney General Pam Bondi issued a directive citing Trump's NSPM 7 throughout, entitled Ending Political Violence Against ICE. 2 days later, this bulletin in this article was produced. They're designating all of us as domestic terrorists. They are designating every single one of us as domestic terrorists, and that's how they're going to proceed this Saturday against the No Kings protests, which are going to, I think they're going to be a lot bigger than they were in June. And there were several million people involved in those protests in June. I think these protests on October 18th nationwide are going to be fucking massive. They're going to be absolutely massive. And the Trump administration and federal law enforcement are telling police officers nationwide to treat every participant as a domestic violence extremist and to treat every single one of us as a domestic terrorist. This is the criminalization of dissent, and it's going to start wide scale this coming Saturday. When I marched in the San Francisco No Kings protest march last June, I didn't see any law enforcement at all. I really doubt that that's going to be the case this time. It seems very clear to me that this Saturday is when the administration is going to start treating us like domestic terrorists, like domestic violence extremists, for disagreeing with this administration. Protected constitutional speech. If you're going to a march this Saturday, please be careful.